through, and I'm just going to step back and let the panelists go. And I just also want to honor all of the people who are doing hard work in this way, in this world, especially in Seattle, and all the voices that we don't have here, and how important it is to have all the different cultures and races represented and speaking. And so we're going to do the best we can with this panel, and just acknowledge that if we were to be complete, we'd have maybe 500 people out here from all different backgrounds to really be able to represent everybody as completely as they deserve. So, Sharon, want to say hi to everybody?
Hello, everybody.
So we have Sharon Blinko of People Helping People. She's the founder of the foundation, and it's a nonprofit. And it's all about assisting homeless people with supplies and food and needs. And she'll tell you a lot more about that. And then we have Denise Malm. And let me get the company correct. The Senior Center, you're a Senior Center social worker and housing advocate. And what was the company again? Wallingford, thank you. And again, you will get to share more moving forward. And then we have Michelle Storms, the Executive Director of ACLU Washington. And we have Craig Gibson of Youth Care. You are the the volunteer coordinator. Okay, great. And then we have Patricia Terry, who works at the Angela, you would do more than that, but Harbor View downtown, working as a social worker. Trauma-informed care is how we met. Hello. Some people I'm meeting for the first time, so it's very exciting. So, that's right, Kat Jobs. We have just been in communication. So you're an RN and you work with opioid addiction. Is that correct? Okay, great. That's an important perspective to bring. And then we have Samir Radade. Sorry. Yeah. I guess I've never said it out loud. Yeah. So yes, so you're an environmental advocate and you're a big fan of the Green New Deal. Awesome. Great. So we're going to start with Sharon, and I'm going to pass the mic. And thank you for being here. You're welcome to walk around or sit, however you want.
I'm just going to sit. I have a bad knee. Good evening, everyone. I am, again, Sharon Blinko. I'm the founder of the People Helping People Foundation, which assists with food, clothing, hygiene items, shelter, medical, dental, and the pets. I am a former Boeing employee, line inspector, approaching 30 years of service, who was wrongfully terminated following the point of discovery, which is relative to the tab mechanism, assembly, installation, and my safety of flight concerns. Yes, thank you. Let's see. The People Helping People Foundation was founded on behalf of my sister, Darylyn Blenko, who was stricken with E. coli, the 015787 bacteria strain, along with her co-workers at the Costco Wholesale Corporation, located in Tukwila, Washington, involving Mountain Mist Bottled Water Company, leaving her unable to work. I gave up my apartment, Social Security, and pension for a family member to achieve a professional goal. My mission is to change the perspective on homeless people who they are. Thank you.
So I work with the older adults at the Wallingford Community Senior Center, and came upon the role of housing justice advocate for older adults purely by accident. When I went to social work school, I never thought that I would be sitting here right now. In 2017, I worked with Pike Market Senior Center, where most of their population is homeless or has housing insecurity. And what we noticed among the senior centers in King County, specifically here in Seattle, is that we were seeing more and more older adults that were coming into the senior center and hanging out, using it as a day center. They knew they could get a cup of coffee, they could wash up in the bathroom, they were looking for services. And then we noticed that we were seeing a increase in people coming to us and saying, I'm 80 years old and my rent has just gone up $300 and it's more than what I get in Social Security, so now I need to get into low income housing by the end of the month. And it's tough to tell somebody in that situation that there's probably a 2 to a 5 year wait, because when you're 80, so I'll bring it home. So we did a consultation with other senior centers in King County, put together a resource book, and word got out that we were doing this work, and it went from a article in Crosscut to, you know, interviews on TV and things like that. And then people coming and saying, thank you for speaking out on behalf of older adults because they don't have a voice. The other piece that I'm really going to bring home that I really want people to understand tonight is that we have a whole new population of homeless seniors that it's now happening. And there isn't any safety net or any prevention that is going into keeping them from being housed. So the people out there who know me know I can get on a soapbox with this, so I'm going to pass it on to you.
Thank you. So I'm really glad to be here and grateful to Jenna for hosting and for people for showing up and caring. So I'm at the ACLU, and what I want to tell you from a personal perspective about this topic is that many years ago, long before I even thought about being a lawyer, I happened to take on a position living and working in a homeless shelter. And it was at that time that I kind of changed my mind about what I wanted to do with my life, because as I was cooking with the residents and cleaning house with the residents and staying up late at night talking and hearing about how the loss of a job spiraled into the loss of a place to live, or a domestic violence situation that was poorly handled had led to no place to live, I thought there has to be something more that can be done than us providing a roof. And that led me into the career of law. So I will fast forward for the purposes of our conversation now and just talk about some of the things that the ACLU of Washington is thinking about when it thinks about this problem of people being unsheltered. We have long been concerned with the legal and human rights of people who don't have shelter, who live outside. And because all people in our state, in our country, continue to have legal rights, regardless of whether they have what the government calls a home or not, which means that their property should not be taken away from them. And we, in fact, you might know, sued the city of Seattle for doing that, for destroying people's property and taking their things from them. And that case wasn't able to continue for some various legal technicalities, but we haven't stopped paying attention to that problem because you have due process rights in your tent, and people's hygiene items and medications and tools for their work were being taken from them. So that's one example of some of the advocacy that we've done. We've recently reached out to municipal attorneys across the state of Washington because city and county councils often enact ordinances that criminalize homelessness in various ways, that criminalize poverty, essentially. And we've reminded them recently that criminalizing panhandling is almost always unconstitutional, that criminalizing public camping is unconstitutional when shelter is not available. And we know that shelter is not available for vast quantities of people, and that interference with religiously based encampments is also prohibited by law. So these are some of the things that the law does for people who are unsheltered, but that they don't always receive the benefits of because city and county councils don't acknowledge those laws to be the case. And so we try to share information with people. We've worked with the Seattle University Law School Homelessness, what's it called? The Homelessness Rights Advocacy Project, to putting together toolkits and information for people to help them know what their rights are and how to respond to situations. So if they're dealing with law enforcement or with other government officials, they at least can know their rights. And by the way, I put some pamphlets out on that table out there that you are more than welcome to take with you. So I won't say any more right now, but I will just say that at the root of our engagement with this work is the dehumanization and the criminalization of people simply for not having money or resources, instead of addressing the fact that we don't have affordable housing or addressing the fact that we don't have good services for mental and physical health and drug addiction and so on. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. My name is Craig. I represent Youth Care. We are a youth provider here in Seattle for young people 12 to 24 years old who are at risk of homelessness or currently experiencing it. I've been with the agency for 5 years, both as a direct service worker in one of our transitional housing programs in the University District, followed by working at our downtown facility called the Orion Center, that bright neon green building over on Denny and Stewart, the best billboard we'll probably ever have. And I currently do community engagement work and just really focus on trying to dispel some of those common stereotypes that people hold near and dear just because they haven't heard the personal stories that a lot of us have up close and personal. The young folks that I work with are facing kind of a unique set of challenges. So I'm hopeful to bring that young perspective or the youth perspective to homelessness to the conversation this evening. Some of those common reasons are aging out of foster care. About a third of the young folks that we see directly come from that system that is failing young people on a daily basis. We see young folks who are in and out of juvenile detention at disproportionate rates. Folks that we have actually learned juvenile detention has been the most stable space that they've ever had as an adolescent. So young folks actually committing crimes to go back to a comfortable space in their mind where adults know them and they trust those adults and they have reliable meals and beds and community. We also work within the public school system. I was happy to see this was the location. We actually operate out of the Interagency Academy across the way here, running a garden program and employment program for young people in that alternative school. And we just opened up a shelter space actually on Hudson in Southeast Youth and Family Service Center, focused on immigrant and youth of color. Some other things that are unique to young folks, young people are dependent on having reliable, consistent, and stable adults in their lives to thrive and to reach their potential, and are often at the mercy of circumstance through no fault of their own. We have young folks, about 30% of the people that we work with at Youth Care, who are about 1,500 unique folks in a year, are queer, members of the LGBTQ plus community who have been kicked out for coming out or who are rejected by their home communities. Over 80% of the young people that we worked with this past year were non-white, which is wildly disproportionate to what the city of Seattle looks like. So we're proud to name, although it's unfortunate that racism, homophobia, transphobia are direct causes of homelessness. And I think that's something that we as a community can't ignore, along with lots of other large systemic issues that are failing young folks in particular. So the last thing that I'll leave you with before I pass this along is that the affordability crisis in Seattle has just totally changed the landscape of the young folks that we're working with. We can connect folks to mental health services, to education opportunities, to employment training. But if there's not an affordable unit at the end of that journey for a young person to move into, then it's a lost cause. And as a young person who's often starting off at entry-level positions, you're working 80 hours a week at minimum wage to afford a market rate apartment in Seattle. That is what our young people are up against. And until that problem is addressed, we aren't going to see the progress that as a community we hope to hit. So looking forward to our conversation.
Hello, thank you. I'm so glad that I'm here today. I think this is exactly what people need to be doing, is talking, breaking down into small groups with other people's opinion and experiences. I already can identify with the people on the panel and what they're talking about. I've been working for the last 12 years with a program that's run by Harborview with affiliation with Healthcare for the Homeless through Public Health. And the idea was so working in mental health, we did case management, counseling, actually whatever it took to get things done. And I think that the years that I've actually worked there, I've seen sort of a more degrading of the kind of system and the systems that are in place. It's becoming harder and harder to get things done, to get the services, even though there's a lot of money coming somewhere, it doesn't always seem to sort of trickle down. And I do think that one of the things about these discussions is that I think sometimes people look at, they focus on homelessness as the problem, when actually I think homelessness is really a symptom and a result of what we've been talking about on the panel. And so, again, unless we start focusing on how we're going to solve those larger system problems, and they're not going to be solved by the system. So I think that it does kind of fall to us to do some of that. The other thing I think that needs to really be talked about and understood better is trauma, the type of trauma that most of the people that I have worked with have experienced. Of course, there's a lot of trauma with just living out in the street, but the majority, just like Greg was saying, I mean, the majority of people that I've worked with have been in traumatic situations since they were quite young. Also, partly due to some of the problems with the system, all the systems. I mean, the economic system, institutional racism systems, the mental health system, which years ago kind of decided that psych hospitals weren't good for people, which is good, but then they just released them with no plan. And some of those people are some of the aging out. So there's the problem with people that are can't afford their apartments. And then there's a problem with the people have really been struggling their whole life, and now either their caregivers have died, or they've run into other problems, or they've been on the streets for 40 years. We've also seen at Angeline's, where I'm cited, so the program I'm involved in, the idea was to not have us kind of working in an office or up at Harborview. The idea was to have us cited in places where the people were, so we could actually meet them and talk with them and outreach. And I think that's the best way to kind of, break down any system, is that you have to talk to people, you have to have access. And it's just appalling, some of the systems currently. So I think that kind of understanding more about how trauma impacts somebody their whole life, but also their psychological, their emotional, their physiological, and sort of their resources, because some of what separates some people is the fact that they don't have any safety nets, whether from the system, also from the families that they come from, which have also suffered. So you have kind of this, many of us could become homeless, but chances are we have some something in place, somebody that would help us. And a lot of these people seriously do not. And so to see, we've had a woman 93 years old sleeping on a mat in the shelter is just, so both the young people, the old people, and again, I mean, we keep talking about the opiates, it's like, but is anybody really talking about like, why are so many people kind of zonking out? I mean, like, what is going on with our culture, with the trauma that's going on, like in a broader sense? So I think kind of understanding how trauma really impacts people, and when you're working out of a survival mode, as many people are, that sort of has a whole different impact on like your behavior, your ability to trust people. You're kind of used to going it alone. And so then we have these big systems that are going to solve the problem, and they don't trust them. They're some of the same systems that actually had hurt them. So a lot of times people start out with good intentions, and then it's like, well, these people don't seem to want help, or they don't seem to want housing, and they don't really realize. I mean, there was one story it was from New York, and it was talking about a policeman had offered this gentleman, kind of that was homeless, a pair of shoes because he noticed it was winter. His shoes were awful, and they were falling apart. And so he brought them to the guy, and the guy was like, well, thank you. Every day when he went by the man wasn't wearing them. So finally he said something about like, well, and he says, if I wear those shoes, they're going to kill me. I mean, I can't walk around these streets with these really fancy shoes on. So again, it's like nice intentions, but total disconnect in terms of what people's lives are like and what survival really costs people.
Hi, I'm Kat, and am I making this work? No. Hello. Okay. So I'm a direct care provider, and so my job is with people in the day-to-day, and like Patricia, and I'm not going to really focus on systems so much as personal experience, because personal experience is where love comes in. And love, I asked one of my patients today, because I was like, well, I have to talk about this stuff. What would you say? And he was homeless for 9 years, and he lived under the Spokane Street Bridge, and, he pulled somebody out of a burning vehicle, and, so he had the direct experience. And he said a few things, but one of the things he said that I'll start with and finish with is love is what changes things. But your story about the shoes kind of reminded me of the other day. My office is at the Sobering Center, which is where the chronic inebriates have kind of a shelter. So when people are really drunk downtown, they get picked up and they get taken there. So then they go out in the morning, and then they come into where I am, and they kind of hang around a while, and I try and get the people who are on heroin onto Suboxone. And one day they were sitting around, and they said, yeah, we were at our corner, and man, that day we got 14 cereal bars. Why do people have cereal bars in their car? Because they call it flying a sign. So they were flying their sign. And so this other guy today said, look, don't give people cereal bars. Give them clothes. Give them blankets. You don't need any more cereal bars. So, stop giving your clothes to Goodwill. Give them to the people on the street. They'll be happy about it, or they'll throw them away. What do you care? The other thing this guy said was that Gregoire, when she declared the state of emergency, how many years ago now, gave $16 million towards water, power, and sewage for people on the streets. And he wanted to know where that money went. And let's see, what else did he say? Well, let's go say love one more time, which means actually asking people their names, talking to people. If you go by somebody the same place every day, for God's sake, you should know who they are, right? Talk to them. Okay, so here's the other thing that made me happy. In the Sobering Center, it's basically people hanging out and kind of getting it together before they go out and try and find their next beer so they don't go into withdrawal. And one of the things they wanted to do was, their feature is the untold stories of the Sobering Center. So like, bring to life the people there, bring their lives to something that's real. And the other one was a reality show where you had 30 days on the streets in a city you're not from, called Streetwise. So love. Okay, I'll stop there.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you so much, Jenna Beem, for inviting me, and I thank all of you for your interest and engagement in this issue. I'll give a little bit of background about who I am. More recently, I've been moving back and forth between Seattle and DC. Moved to Seattle 5 years ago to work for the Washington Environmental Council, a statewide nonprofit that advocates for state-level climate and clean energy policies mainly. I was a candidate for state representative in the Capitol Hill Legislative District, where I became acutely aware of the affordable housing crisis and the inequities in access to affordable housing based on who you are. And now I work for Front and Centered, which is a coalition of racial and economic justice groups in the state, and on behalf of this coalition, we advocate for state-level climate and environmental policies. And so one thing that's really become clear in my work especially working with Front and Centered, is that everything touches everything. All of these issues are really interconnected. And one of the frustrating things with the Seattle is Dying video is that it didn't really kind of acknowledge that. There are significant social systemic inequities that are causing people to be homeless. And it's not really Seattle that's dying. It's our entire habitat that is dying. And if we come up with some solution that when you go by the bridge you don't see any tents, that doesn't mean that things are okay. Like we're still pretty much on the course towards disaster. But fortunately, there is a policy solution that is going to be critical to addressing homelessness and poverty, because climate change is linked to that in many ways. First off, from the disaster standpoint, when a climate disaster strikes, there's ample reams of data that shows people of color, low-income communities are the most impacted by that, because that's where the government dedicates the least resources to helping to respond to the disaster. And of course, from the beginning, the government usually provides poor quality infrastructure. And then you can just think of many examples. I mean, obviously in California, the entire city of Paradise got wiped out because of a wildfire. But up here, the Quinault Nation is slowly starting to flood, and that whole nation is being forced to relocate. And just we're going to have another disastrous wildfire season. Who knows who will be dislocated as a result of that, and that will be another reason why people may migrate to the Pacific Northwest, just from the country and also from the world. And obviously I think the United States owes it to the rest of the world to kind of accept more people, which is we're doing the reverse right now, but because we're so responsible for climate change. So it's going to get worse. I think one of the solutions, though, is really a Green New Deal. And you're hearing this talked about at the national level, and among the great things that it does is it requires public investment in clean energy infrastructure and in natural resource protection. It also provides a guarantee for healthcare. And healthcare is actually very much critically related to the environment and climate, because if you have access to healthcare, your ability to respond to pollution and its impacts are a little bit easier. And it also provides a job guarantee. And I think what that really boils down to is the work of building a green economy is going to really require lots of more people to be hired. So those two things right there can get at poverty and preventing somebody from not being from being on the street. But also just I think like we're talking about this at a city level. I mean, I think the key solution really at the with the U.S. leading at the federal level, getting the rest of the globe to come on, but then there's policies at the state level, like Initiative 1631. But if we want to boil this down to like the city or county level, then it's really just fees on high value things, luxury things. I mean, I suppose the head tax that was really controversial is one example. There's probably a couple other things like parking fees, which if you're higher income, you generally can afford the parking fee. So having some type of a progressive fee source, and then investing it in things like transit, affordable housing, some type of an education job creation program. Those are some of the solutions that I think we're going to need to ensure that we truly tackle this issue in the long term.
Wow, you guys did not disappoint. Thank you. I'd love to open it up to the audience for questions. I see a hand creeping up.
Thank you. And I just wanted to thank everyone on the panel for being here. Again, I am a social work student, and I resonated with so much of the things that you had to share, from the importance of understanding trauma and addiction to dealing with this, to racial and sexual identities involved in this. And thank you so much for talking about the social and human consequences of environmental policy. I feel like we don't talk about that. I mean, we don't talk about any of this enough. But I kind of had a question, because I used to be an inpatient chemical dependency counselor, perhaps directed at CAT. It really stood out to me in Seattle is Dying that we had to go all the way to Rhode Island to look at treatment models. And granted, they were looking at something that we don't do here, which is methadone treatment in prisons. But I was just curious your thoughts, or anybody's thoughts, on the fact that, you know, that it's such a crucial part of dealing with this in this very complicated, sticky situation with all these moving parts. The fact that was glossed over on any of the things that we do here.
For those of you that don't know what Suboxone is, it's a medication that it basically it transfers people from an opiate to this medication like methadone, except it's got a stronger bind than either methadone or heroin. So if you're using this medication and you use methadone or heroin, it won't do anything for you. It might give you a little tiny buzz, but it's really not worth the money. So once people get stabilized on it, they're really happy to be on it because it costs a lot less. They don't have to get up and go get drugs every day, which is kind of the point. Anyway, right now there are so many programs in Seattle that are we're trying to flood the market. It's actually got a pretty good street value at this point. And we're trying to flood it so much that the street value even goes down. And you can get it at King County Jail. So this is brand new. They don't do methadone, but they're doing Suboxone. And I actually didn't watch the Seattle is Dying because I couldn't tolerate it. I heard all about it and had a lot of really crispy conversations about it, but access to the kind of medication is really easy right now. There's so many walk-in clinics. Like where I work, you could get it on the same day. More of the problem is adherence. Most people who are living on the streets have a really hard time coming back to the same appointment every week. I don't know if nodding. Okay, so if I have somebody on a Tuesday, I say, hey, come in next Tuesday. They might come in on 2 Tuesdays from now and the medications will have gone down and back up again and down. So when you have a really chaotic life, it's really hard to stay on medications. And so methadone actually in some ways works better, even though it's worse, I think, because you have to go there every day to dose. It's actually structure. It's a structure that people respond to. I don't know, that's probably not addressing your question, but that's what I know. Yeah.
Just on the thing about availability of medication-assisted treatment for people with opioid abuse disorder who are in jails, King County does have that program, but all the counties do not. So they're and I know that because we actually did research into it to see who was providing that, because what ends up happening when you become incarcerated, and like if you were already on one of those Suboxone or buprenorphine or methadone, whichever one it is, if you go off it, not only do you have withdrawals in jail, right? Then when you're back out on the street and you use the drug, you're highly subject to overdose and to death. And so we just had a really exciting victory that I want to share with you, because we actually sued Whatcom County because in their jails they were forcing people to go off their medication. And we actually just entered into a settlement like 2 weeks ago, and it does 2 things that are really great. And first of all, I want to say that we actually use the Americans with Disabilities Act, because one of the things that troubled us so much is that, if you are diabetic and you go to jail, they don't not give you your insulin. But if you have opioid use disorder, then that is also a medical condition. So anyway, the good things are that now they will do it. And also, if you come into the jail and you hadn't already been on a medication, they'll start you on it. So that's huge. So we're going to be taking that on the road to all the other counties, right, to try to get that accomplished, because it was through a settlement, not through a court ruling. But those are some of the things that, we can do that have an impact, through the law. So just thought I'd throw that out.
Do any of the panelists have a question for any of the other panelists? I'll let you percolate on that. Oh, you do? Yeah, thanks.
I don't know if any of you, I'm sure, Michelle, I think you followed the case, the 9th District Court, right? They ruled on something about a city cannot sweep an area unless it is providing affordable housing or shelter safety. Could somebody talk about what that housing would look like?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think this is the key question. And obviously we're still having sweeps here in Seattle. And like I said, our lawsuit was not actually able to continue. So I don't know what the exact wording of that requirement was. So it makes it difficult for me to answer. So I apologize for not being up on that. Yeah, that's all I have at this moment. Yeah, please.
So the documentary that was shown, did everybody see it? I mean, is that why we're here? Not everybody saw it. So the documentary really focused on, they sensationalized what drug addiction, mental illness, and I'm pretty transparent with my language and my presentation. I was so fucking pissed when I saw that. I just was, because it told one story, and there's so much to people who are on the street. There's a story, there's trauma. And you know what? When I was working with Pike Market Senior Center, it's like they class people who are homeless or housing insecure, right? I mean, you're middle class homeless if you have a car, right? There's chronic homelessness. There's people who've been in and out. There's people who are trauma. There's a story behind every person out there who does not have secure housing. There just is, and I think that it really did not speak to that at all. And the other piece that I want to bring up, the reason why I'm here is because there is a silent epidemic going on with older adults. There are, people in their 70s who are going out and trying to find work and then deal with ageism. People say, oh, well, just go on Craigslist. I have a friend of mine who's blind, older, and he would try to go and rent a house, and nobody wanted anything to do with him because he was older and he was blind. So there's so much to a person when you see them, and it's not everybody has mental illness and is dealing with substance abuse. And what I'll say to that is, with older adults, often women who are becoming homeless for the first time, right, in their 60s, 70s, possible, they're not going to go to a shelter. Shelters are not safe. In fact, I have a woman who will take her Social Security check, spend as much money on a hotel room as possible, and then go sleep in her car. She will not go to the shelter. It's not safe. So this is so complex, right? So we have this image of what homeless looks like, and we need to start telling the other stories. The end. Speak to that?
I just want to say that it seemed like it generalized, like you were saying or whatever. I saw that, and I was really disappointed, because I was
I was excited to hear that the topic was going to be addressed. As you said, it was hard to watch. I volunteer at DESC, the thrift shop. I've been there about 3-4 years. I've lost count. Um, it's really interesting. I meet a lot of people from the emergency center, and in my neighborhood, Capitol Hill, I do, talk to people who are homeless. I do get to know them. And in fact, I was telling somebody on the way up here, because I do the windows at the thrift shop is where I work, which is connected to the emergency center. And I really enjoy it, but I do everything there. I meet a lot of people. And we passed by on the bus on the way up here, and I saw a trash truck right next to the thrift shop where the tents are. The street was blocked off. Trash truck was there, and there was about 10 policemen standing out there with them. So I was like, okay, I think I know what's going on here. So yeah, it is an epidemic. I was disappointed in the thing. I saw it when it came on YouTube. It was a little different, the news, kind of dissected it a little bit, but I thought they were really going to tell us what the problems, the issues were, and just kind of go into it to give us a clearer indication. And I was really disappointed when it was generalized with, they're, drugs and mental issues. So anyway, that's just my point of view. So.
So we're all friends of Sharon's coming to support her. But my question is that my partner and I are resident managers in a building in Capitol Hill. And about a month ago, a couple of men set up a tent across the street from our apartment building. And it's really residential. It's only apartment buildings. So with the one tent there and 3 guys inside of it, it caused the biggest ruckus in our neighborhood. On our side of the street, it's like a 42 unit building. On the other side, it was like 40 something units too. And it was like everybody was just focused on the tent, and the separation between like us versus them or something, and also our jobs there, we have to answer to our boss, which is like, keep the residents happy, keep the residents safe and all this. And the residents of the building were just so upset, even though the guys in the tent weren't doing anything. They were just living in a tent. And I didn't really know how I could be supportive or like help at all, or even have the words of like what to say with all of that. In that situation, it was like really difficult to kind of navigate, I guess. And I guess my question is like, well, I mean, and they actually left after a couple of weeks. We never really got, I was able to have a conversation with one guy for like 15 minutes one day, and we had like so much in common. But, I wasn't able to really do anything.
Do any of you guys have any follow-up thoughts?
I appreciate that scenario because it's so real and it's a part of everyday Seattle, and there's nothing about it that feels good, right? And so it's like, for me, what I want to offer up is that there are so many small decisions that we each can make every day and leave with a more positive experience than that which feels pretty hopeless. The young folks that I've worked with for the past 5 years in Seattle just have shared the story of, feeling invisible and the just like actual mental toll it takes to be ignored by every person that passes you. And so I kind of grappled with like, why is that? Like, why do we not make eye contact? Why do we disengage? All of the things that we do. And it's because it's self-preservation in a way, right? It's we don't feel like we have capacity to make the impact that we would like to, and we don't know what the answer is, and so we disassociate to preserve that feeling of self. And it's just the little things, like when my family, I'm from Ohio, it looks very different there, just with there aren't physically as many people outside, and we're from a small town. So my family initially, when I lived down in the ID, and they were just overwhelmed and totally blown away by the number of people who are outside, and a little fearful. And it was shocking to me because it's the norm here, right? But just saying hello, I mean, it's as little as small as that is, just saying hi to people is like so impactful. And I hope you have a good day. You know, I mean, it goes so far. I really don't. The feedback we've gotten is just like, you know, I was seen, I'm not invisible, even if that's one person. I think that impact can't be overstated. And then just knowing, like, in your neighborhood, what are some referrals you could make? So that's the other thing I arm people with, is just like, know one or two places that you trust and you can actually vouch for, to say, hey, like, I don't know if you know this, but there's a drop-in center on the corner that actually you could access, or you know, this business down the street doesn't mind if folks come in here and hang out. You know, there's little things like that a lot of times these are people's communities that they grew up in, and we need to help them find the other people in the community who can be supportive, even if you don't have capacity in your role, because that's tough too, right? We're always going to find ourselves between a rock and a hard place in some situations, but acknowledging people, honoring that they are our neighbors is huge. And that's like the humanity, that's the love piece, right? Like that is, we cannot lose that. That is the one thing I feel like we cannot let go of, because then we've lost.
I'm often surprised by how, you know, when you're telling that story about, you know, so here's like 80 some units between both sides of the street, and it sounds like the vast majority of those people just wanted those folks in the tent to go away, as opposed to relating to them as human beings, which I think is to Craig's point. And so I think another thing that we can do is, when we talk to other folks, like there's all this NIMBYism that happens all the time. When we try to get a city ordinance passed to just give people more time, because like all these, when their property gets taken, like they don't really get reasonable notice, and people really fought it and said, oh, you know, the ACLU wants homeless people in your park or something, and there were just really weird reactions. And what we were just trying to do was create a little space for people to have a way to preserve their things and preserve their dignity. And so one of the things that I think about, like in my personal life also, is just talking to people who are who might have negative feelings. I remember when the Downtown Emergency Service Center was looking at opening another space not far from where I live. I was really surprised how many of my neighbors were against it. I'm like, why would you be against that? That actually prevents all the things that you say you're afraid of, if somebody has a place to go and can be safe and stable. So talking to people about as not that I can say who all unsheltered people are, who are all the people who live outside, but I can say they're human beings, and you know, and they have lives, and you know, somebody loves them and they love somebody else, and like, let's be kind to each other. So that's the other thing. And I know as a manager, maybe you're not feeling like you're empowered to do that, but in your personal life, maybe you could be.
Start here and go there.
I have a couple of grown daughters who, when they introduce me, sometimes they say, this is my mom, she takes in strays. And I've had a lot. I'm a single parent, and they were in high school at the time this all started. I had an extra room, and through couch surfing or Craigslist or whatever, bringing in people, and a lot of people kind of looked at me like, oh, you're nuts. What are you doing? You're crazy. And it was always just something that I had to build some sort of a trusting relationship with these people that were coming in, whether they were my daughter's friends from high school, these kids that got kicked out, or there was families that moved from out of the country and coming back. And they were always really good experiences for me, really good experiences for me. And recently, within the past year, I heard of a friend who was a dear friend. He's here, but he left. But dear friend from college, and I hadn't seen him in a long time. when I heard he was homeless and he was living down in Tacoma and that he'd lost everything, this is a guy who was in our wedding. And I was just like, well, I've got an extra room, of course. And yes, it's been a hard road because of the substance abuse issues, but it really does feel good to help someone if you have the space to do that. And there must be people like myself who have an extra room. I approached Scott with, hey, you need a place to live. I need some stuff done on my house. And he was a carpenter who lost his business during the crash. And it was symbiotic in terms of, I mean, it was mutually beneficial. And yes, there were ups and downs, there were hard parts, and he's been able to go through treatment, and we've been able to use the system to help him get out there on his own, and he now is living in Beacon Hill here, and I've helped him to figure out how to go out there and get the services that are available. And what? But I couldn't, I just couldn't not help. But I had a lot of friends that kind of backed away from me, and family that were like, are you crazy? What are you doing? And yeah, I put up with a lot, but it comes down to, I had the capacity to be there and to help. And there must be people out there with an extra room. You know, there must be a way to match some people up that can do these kind of things. You know, I think of my 92-and-a-half-year-old mother who really could use somebody, you know, living right there in the house with them. But it's that trust factor. How do you build that situation for pairing people up that make it mutually beneficial? Because I can tell you, I spent a year with Scott, and my house, the work he did around my house, I couldn't have paid for, you know, so it was mutually beneficial. And I wish there was a way to, you know, connect people that are in need that way. So just a thought.
You're listening to Rainier Avenue Radio, coming to you from the Columbia City Healing Space. If Seattle is dying, how do we heal? Panel discussion.
Sorry about that. Sure. Yeah.
On homelessness.
Hi, my name's Karen. I use she and her pronouns. Thanks everybody for being here. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on unceded Duwamish land, and they've been the caretakers of this land since time immemorial. You can go to realrent.com if you want to pay a little something back to those folks who are still here. The reason I wanted to talk right now is because it connects to the idea of like people being so afraid of people in their neighborhood. And I think it's interesting that they don't often in the media tell the story of the neighbors who are not afraid at all and like fine, because I know there's plenty of them and I'm one of them. We have a little spot right by our house that's like on this sort of parkland that isn't really, people don't go there that much, and there's like basically a perfect little camping spot there, and there's always someone there. And I won't use their names, but I know their names. Folks come through there. But I've watched several evictions, and it's the Parks Department who does the eviction, so I don't even know if those are counted anywhere. There's sometimes cops, but it's different than other ones. And I feel safer. So like when I would go out and sneak smokes or something, you know, the guy there would be like, oh, watch out, you know, watch out in the dark or whatever. And I was like, I got you looking out for me and stuff. If we know the folks, you know, sometimes there's petty thefts around our neighborhood, like mail and stuff, because people are desperate. And as soon as I know these folks' names, they're not taking the mail from my house. So I feel a lot safer with folks around. And the brutality that I'm witnessing that just gives me panic attacks and makes me so upset is watching these giant groups of Parks Department people come with trash trucks, throw away the sleeping bag when it's freezing. I don't want to use his name. It's this man's sleeping bag right in front of me. No shame. It's brutality. The day before Thanksgiving in the rain, this woman who's making a Thanksgiving cookbook and everything, and her family was visiting. They just destroyed their lives. And I think we need to shift the idea of where the violence and brutality is to these folks. We've got to look at, like, I feel unsafe with all those horrible, like, cops and people coming in to my neighborhood, hurting my neighbors, and we just can't see that that's violence. You know, like, there might be people who we're afraid of who are living on the streets or whatever, but when, you know, they don't come into our homes and take everything we own and put it in a trash truck. That's the cops. So we've got to shift some of the story to who's committing violence, actually. And I think that might help. But it just helps to say out loud that I'm sad for these people and it upsets me and I love my neighbors.
I just wanted to speak to the idea that you were talking about connecting people who want to help to people who might be living on the streets or experiencing homelessness to some level. My husband actually is the founder of a smartphone app that has started in Seattle called Samaritan. And what they do is they give these tiny smart wallets to individuals experiencing homelessness, and then they create a profile for them, and it tells their story, and the stories are the most important part. They're powerful, and there's so much more to them than the stigmas that a lot of people in Seattle, that's all they know about homelessness. And so through this smart wallet, they can people can give. They can go through their profile on the app. You can go and visit multiple profiles, and then the tagline is walk with and not by. And so once you start giving to someone through the app, then you can get updates on different outcomes that they've experienced. And with the beacon is what it's called, they have the opportunity and the responsibility once a month to have what's called a life care visit. And this technology, what it's meant to be, is a tool for nonprofits or Harborview or clinics, anyone that feels that it could be useful to connect with these individuals. They have this opportunity to have a life care visit once a month to keep their beacon active. And so they go in and they talk about what they need, goals that they have, and figure out what they need this next month to try and get there. And they can use it to pay their phone bills. They can actually use the beacon itself at different participating places in Seattle, grocery outlet, Goodwill, a few different cafes and restaurants. So it gives them that empowerment of having choice on what to spend their money on. If they want to go buy chicken or not cereal bars, they want to buy coffee, whatever it is that they feel they need, they can use it for a haircut, career counseling. But I have this sort of dream that it'll be this tool for people in Seattle. I mean, the good news is that citizens in Seattle greatly outnumber the homeless. And if you get a few people walking with someone, you can have life-changing outcomes. You can have jobs, you can have housing, people who have an extra room. So I would encourage you guys to check out the Samaritan app, because I think it's a really powerful tool. But anyway.
I would like to see hotels or apartment owners to give up an apartment or two to bring in families off the street, and you shouldn't have to be denied help that you need to, because if you make too much income, there's that redlining. people can help each other by just saying, hey, his family needs $20 to pay on a light bill, to help with the rent so that they don't get evicted. It would make it a lot easier because we're all just a paycheck away from being out in the street. There's so many ways in which one can be affected by so many ways one can become homeless. Your good health, your health. That's how my sister became homeless, because she's no longer able to work. You can get hit by a car. Death in the families. I mean, it could be anything that could put you right on out. One of my other mission is to start a petition for the regulation and ban of bottled water, and to remove bottled water dispensers from public places, the ones where you turn the bottles upside down, which have been on the news. They've been on forensic files where the gentleman was poisoning his co-workers by putting strychnine down the reservoir. Well, I watched this the same year my sister got sick. And bottled water, a lot of people don't know it's not regulated. And the water that my sister and her co-workers ingested was contaminated with cow fecal matter. And Costco tried to cover it up with mountain mist. She never got compensated for. I'm coming out with her story, which is 35 web pages long. They dismissed her from Valley Medical Center when she came to from being in a coma. While she was in a coma, Dr. John Bondi initiated the LNI claim in her behalf because he knew it was an outbreak. The court gag ordered the other employees, who all lied and said they had food poisoning. The lawyers that agreed in writing to represent my sister never did. They arbitrarily walked away, left her with the bag to hold. Costco went through great lengths to alter and falsify the LNI claim that the doctor initiated. And there's a lot of things that can impact you in life. And so just know that I am not afraid to come forward. I've been wanting to come forward. I'm actually active in the community, raising awareness to people regarding bottled water dispensers, and bottled water needs to be regulated. Wells Fargo off of 4th and Pine Street, I walked into their lobby one day because not only do I help homeless people, and I've been helping homeless people before I even became homeless myself. I walked into their lobby and saw one of those dispensers in the lobby and shared her story with the employees. Word got back to the corporation and their lawyers, and they removed bottled water dispensers from their lobbies nationwide. So I'm going to see if they will back me in my my goal to keep us safe, and bottled water dispensers which makes them deadly, where the bottle is upside down, is you have an open exposed reservoir that is wide open for someone to contaminate, tamper, taint with it. People drink from the spigots. If they don't have cups or glasses, they push that button and they put their mouths right over that spigot. And when they want to refill the bottle in which they're drinking from, they put it right up over the spigot. And that has been on the news, actually. And so I raise awareness to folks. And my sister's story is 35 web pages long. I am the new Erin Brockovich. Really, my sister is still sick. She has irritable bowel syndrome, damaged kidneys and liver. She became type 1, type 2 diabetic. Her COPD and asthma worsened. They found parasites in her intestines years later. It's not a good thing. So just be careful.
I was going to say that's a wonderful example of how one person can can make a huge change. So I think, you know, while we're working on these huge systems, I think it's really important to not get discouraged and feel like it's hopeless. The other thing I want to get back to your app, because the thing that made me think of that is like so many women talk to me about how humiliated they feel. And so I think giving people choices, which is something that, again, choice, having lots of resources gives you lots of choices. Having fewer resources gives you fewer choices. And I think that we sometimes fail to understand what that, I mean, I've seen people go without because it's too humiliating to ask. So this idea that, you know, people are just kind of taking whatever they can get or stealing from people, it's like, I know people, I'm encouraging them to get help, but they are like, no, I don't want to be asking for help. I don't want to be one of those people. So I think choices, because I mean, choice is just one thing that our freedom kind of, that we have. And if we don't have that, I think that's where, you know, we'll see a lot of like trauma kind of come in, and also just that feeling of humiliation. And a lot of people will avoid that by any cost, including not receiving some services that, you know, people that think they're offering something, you know, it's like, yes, you are, but you're also, how are you offering it? So I think the combination of that, one person can do a lot, and actually talking to people just on the street and just saying hello, because that's the other thing, humiliated, isolation. It's just, yeah. So I think we can make a difference in those areas.
I don't know if I made this clear, but you can donate to people through Apple Pay, through the app. And there, it does encourage you to go interact with them because it has a Bluetooth activation actually. So if you are near someone who has a beacon, you'll get a notification to your phone that says, I am so-and-so. And then it's really fun to go actually like introduce yourself and talk to them. But there was one guy who just said that he wanted to take his girlfriend on a date. So he was able to use the money from his beacon to take his girlfriend on a date. And I hear stories like that all the time. And it's things that we take for granted so much that means a lot to people who feel like they need to ask for help all the time. So, yeah.
We had another invited panelist that we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Hi. So my name is Edwina Ho. I'm an instructor at Seattle Central College, and I teach the chemical dependency, primarily chemical dependency courses. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, first of all, was, you know, there is a lot of talk regarding the police and the medical and individuals. And one of the things I teach to my students is that there's 4 perspectives where people are coming from. And one of the perspectives is moral legal, which would be the police would basically, they monitor our society for the morals and the laws. And then another perspective would be the health medical perspective, your doctor, your treatment, those perspectives. And then another perspective would be the social cycle. I mean, the psychosocial perspective, which is the community and what that brings, but also that would include your treatment agencies. And then you have your social cultural, and that's where it would be the community, the individual involvement. And so when we're looking at those 4 different perspectives, we have to understand where someone is coming from those perspectives and the guidelines that needs to follow in those 4 perspectives. So when we look at what the police do or what the government does versus what I want to do as an individual, where does that axis cross? Does that kind of make sense? Okay. The other thing I also want to talk about is about treatment. I mean, that video, plus there's another one, I don't know if many of you have seen it, and it's called Chasing Heroin. It's by Frontline. And that one really documents more on the moral legal perspective, but also how they've intertwined the moral legal perspective, which is the police department, involving it into both the health and the medical perspective by bringing in medications, by bringing Suboxones, and also how they brought in the psychosocial perspective, which would be the treatment, which is something Evergreen does, and they run the LEAD program. And it's now passed on through the nation. I think it's going out through the nation, right? And they're using it as a pilot project and it's going through. Right now, we have agencies where their caseloads are up to 70 to 80 people. Their pay is less than $20 an hour. We're talking people with master's degrees, $25 an hour. And we have agencies out there that are providing Suboxone, which is, for everyone here know what Suboxone? Okay, great. So Suboxone. And we have UW clinics giving out Suboxone. You don't have to have a home. Your Apple covers it. I mean, we even have DSC now who can't get clients for Suboxone. By the way, Patricia, if you want to refer to them, they're over at the line building. They're looking for people. They're having providers. They're having, and they are passing where you don't need a prescription for Suboxone. You can be under a doctor, but you have to be through an agency. So looking at the whole drugs, getting involved, alcoholism is still out there. Meth is coming back. Fentanyl is the number one. And fentanyl, you need to take 2 to 3 Narcans to actually try to save somebody, which is just huge. And a lot of people don't understand, if you're living in the community, who's someone with camps? Camps, having Narcan with you, having Narcan to your neighbors, right? And people are like, what do you mean you're carrying Narcan? Where are you getting that from? You need a prescription. No, you don't. You know, and these are things we can do in our community. But the other thing is to advocate for safe site and understanding what safe site is to advocate for it. So getting back to the whole thing in general, I used to work with Patricia at Healthcare for the Homeless, Harborview, 18, 20, I don't know how many years, where you had to go back down a DESC through the back alley, which we used to call Piss Alley. So way back when, and just looking at the people that are still coming to Seattle. And they're coming to, not everybody, don't get me wrong, but they are coming to Seattle because we have services. We have services, and other cities and towns don't. And Greyhound therapy has been around for, Patricia's over there laughing, right? I mean, how long is Greyhound therapy? Anybody know? What is Greyhound therapy? Greyhound therapy, you either go to jail or a bus ticket to wherever you want to go, and it's pre-printed for Seattle, San Francisco, LA, and that's it. And you get to choose. And a lot of people would take Greyhound therapy, then spend time in jail. A lot of people can't get into treatment, even Portland, so they're coming here. We have, I mean, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying this is what we provide. So we're balancing that. How much do we offer? What are we doing? How are we doing it? What perspective? How much can the community pull versus what is the responsibility of society? I mean, there's a ton of different questions. I kind of put out there on our caseloads are still 70 to 80. When I left 6 years ago, it is nonstop. And for what? $20, $30, not even $30 an hour, 25? You know, who wants to go in this field? And to even go in the field, you need $88,000 to $9,000 to get licensed by the state for a starting $17 an hour job, I think, Zach? Yeah. So here's some questions. You know, it goes back to what are we providing and how are we going to get ourselves out of this mess? Is that all kind of right? Okay. Edwina, would you like to come up now? So I'm right back here. I just wanted to just kind of put that out that, you know, if you want to go to school, if you want to make a difference. Thank you.
I feel like that was 2 quarters worth of content in one speech. That was a lot. I just want to make sure everybody knows what Narcan is. And DESC. DESC.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was gonna say, I'm a nursing student at UW doing my senior practicum at DESC, which is the Downtown Emergency Service Center. Specifically, I'm working in the host and sage teams. So I had a general question I wanted to pose after the last speaker spoke. For those of you that watched the documentary, there's a term, free-addle, just saying like what she alluded to, that our city is offering so many services for rehousing homeless and the Suboxone programs, which are now up and coming with a lot of funding. I know that my agency at DESC, like she was saying, we just got a brand new grant to really recruit many more clients into our Suboxone program. So I was just wondering what the panelists can provide their opinions about in a system that seems so strapped in terms of staffing. Like we don't have enough staff to help all the people that want the help, and we don't have enough housing units to house all the people, and yet is it really true that people are coming to Seattle because of the rumors that there's so many resources and it's a free Seattle, and if you just come to Seattle you can get free food, you can get free housing, free Suboxone, free case management and all of these things? And like how, like can we just like piece that apart and help me make sense of that? Thanks.
I'm sure all of us have an opinion about this one. I worked in the Housing Health Outreach team, which actually has somebody at DESC at the Morrison. And what we did was what Housing First is it's not having to go be sober to get housing. You just get housed when you raise on the list. And so I was a nurse in that program, and I had a lot of people who told me that they did come here. I think they would have come here anyway, because if you live in Florida, there's no services. So if you have bad teeth and you're homeless, you get nothing. And yeah, so the free Seattle thing is kind of real, because I've had people come here and actually get their teeth pulled and maybe get dentures that fit and maybe not. But yeah, I think that is actually, I mean, they did a study that said that wasn't true, but the way that they did the study was they pulled where people had been before they saw the last address they lived before they became homeless. And a lot of people put 77 South Washington as their address. And if anybody doesn't know what that is, it's it's a mail room. And so that's where they said their address was. So a lot of the statistics just kind of flap around, in my opinion. I was also going to try and bring up the tiny house villages. I think it's a good topic too. Okay.
I'll just speak to the youth perspective on this. The overwhelming majority of young people in Seattle are Seattleites, or from the state of Washington. Over half of the adults who are experiencing homelessness in Seattle started off as young people between 12 and 24. So from my world, that is a total myth, that young people are coming here for a free ride. If that is the case in any way, they're not finding that when they get here. The wait list for services is like so long. Young people are on our housing referral list with CEA, Coordinated Entry for All, for months and months and months and months. By the time they get a housing referral, it's very likely it's not a good fit for them. They might have to relocate to a different part of Seattle, outside of the city of Seattle. I mean, it's just time and time again, the systems aren't working for young people. And they're people who grew up here in neighborhoods where they're no longer able to afford to live. Even the folks who have relocated here, I mean, like I relocated here because it's a great place to live. There's opportunity, the economy's booming. I believe everyone has a right to pick where they want to live. And that shouldn't be a knock against you. I mean, I want to share this beautiful city with everyone in the world. Although maybe Amazon can stay out of it. But I mean, like, that is not what I want the conversation to be about. It's like, this is a diverse place. People move here from rural counties because there's people who look like them. There's a community that will celebrate your sexual orientation, and there's people who will embrace the fact that you can be whoever you want to be, fly your freak flag, you know, whatever it is. This is the thriving metropolis of the entire region, and it should be available for everyone, and you shouldn't have to make $80,000, $90,000 to live here, period.
So I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, Zach. So the title of this panel was, if it's dying, how do we heal it? Right? And so I want to piggyback what you had to say about your sister. I mean, when you look at capitalism, right? It's like we are so busy pointing our fingers at people in tents and stuff that we are not considering the whole institution, capitalism. You know, I mean, I know. Zach and I know each other and have these conversations very often. I saw Films for Action, which is a thing on Facebook, I don't know. But Gabor Mate, who many people know, was talking about the whole, and hope I'm not stepping on toes here, but he was talking about how we are so focused on Trump and this Russian gate thing that we are not looking at the system that has created this issue. We are so focused on him. And when I was coming today, I was thinking, you know what? I mean, that's for everything. We are so focused on who's good, who's bad, right? Oh, I don't want to see this person in a tent outside of my door. We are not looking. When you talk about the Amazon head tax, you know, would that make a difference? But it would be changing, putting money in a different system. Hey, we don't have an income tax. We're always complaining about, you know, taxes and things like that, but hey, what about an income tax? So we're not focusing on the right thing. So as far as healing, I would say to look at the big picture, and what it is that's creating these situations that puts us here in these seats. You know, and the second thing, which I have said to every single politician who would listen to me, until you have people who have had this experience or work directly and sit with somebody as they're sharing their story of being on the street, until you have them on decision-making panels and stuff like that, we are going to keep, this is theater. You can write every damn report you want and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I've got a bundle of them. But until you start talking to the people, it's not gonna, okay. The end, sorry.
So I have a question for all of you on that same note. If Seattle is dying, how do we heal? Based on all of your wisdom and experience and time talking with others and doing everything that you do you have one thought of like, what works? We've talked a lot about what doesn't, and that's important too, but I would just really love to hear. And also, let's put this in this really open space. Imagine money is not an issue, seriously, and that policies don't matter. What would be the change you'd want to see that would make a difference? And it's totally hypothetical. We're not holding anybody to this. Okay. Who would like to start? Do you need a minute? Yeah. Everybody get an apartment? Cool.
I'm glad we're transitioning to the healing part, right? Because there's actually a lot to be optimistic about. Seattle housed more people this past year than they have in history. The downside to that is we had more people enter homelessness than ever before. So we actually know what's working. There are providers, there are professionals like the folks up here who know the solutions. I really appreciate the innovation and people going out of their way to do things in their personal lives, but there's actually really great organizations with really dedicated staff who are making $17 an hour, who can't afford to live in Seattle themselves, who are doing this work. Not a week goes by that we don't house a young person and get them their first set of keys to their very first apartment. And that's what makes those of us who make $17 an hour stick around. And it's the stories that you have of folks doing all the things despite all odds, right? But helping folks create community, I think, is the single easiest way to help folks do the things that we all did to thrive. And I absolutely agree that giving someone a home is the easiest way to help them help themselves. You can't work on chemical dependency issues. You can't work on your mental health or provide any sort of self-care until you have a place where you feel safe. And the fact is, shelters don't feel safe for a lot of people. Shelters don't provide housing for you and your loved one, typically. Shelters don't provide a place for you and your furry companion to be together. Those are the things that are, we know that because our kids tell us. It's not rocket scientists. We actually don't need to innovate that much. We need to be able to pay our staff a living wage. We need to be able to have those affordable units to send young folks to. And we need employers who are willing to take a chance on people who want to work their asses off, because there's dignity in work, and our youth are so resilient. It like blows my mind. I think investing in young people is one of the easiest answers that our community can find, because they have hope and resiliency, and they're the future, right? So.
We'd like to welcome back our worldwide audience listening to RainerAvenueRadio.world.org from the Columbia.
Well, I can just summarize my thoughts. It is a little bit hard for me to think, because I am a policy advocate. It's hard for me to think of something outside of policy. But first, I just want to thank a couple of people who spoke about your app and your benevolence and a desire to help people. I do think that there are also some pretty important policies that we need to enact to make that happen as well. In my apartment where I live, there's been this big vacant building for like 5 years, and so I from an environmental perspective, it's such an inefficient use of land. So I think a policy could be to have a big vacant building tax or something. In regards to the motivations of people who are moving to Seattle, I also heard the free Seattle thing. I don't know what exactly people's motivations are, but I think one thing to be sure of is that we are getting a lot of Amazon workers here, and I think that kind of ties in to the broader perspective of we live in a consumption-driven society, which is leading to global warming, which is going to lead more people to come to the beautiful Pacific Northwest, which compared to the rest of the world is going to be least affected by the climate impacts initially, at least. So there's just lots of things that are connected. We ultimately need the federal HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development, to really step in and do these types of solutions. But I just want to go back to the Green New Deal, and also having local hiring agreements for the infrastructure projects, so you can ensure that the benefits go to the community as much as possible. And when you have investment decisions, you have like a community board that oversees those investments. But I would say this group is probably a great way for us to feel positive. And I'm glad to hear of the positive things you are doing. You look at the data, it's nightmarish with this climate change and so many other
since I'm holding it. So I feel like our values are so skewed, right? So on Dearborn, where for a long time there was a Nicholsville, that got torn down, and y'all know what's there now, right? A public storage. There is a gigantic multi-story storage unit, which is to say it was more important to us values-wise as a city to have a place for people to put their stuff than for people to actually live. And whenever I pass by there, because I remember, and there were people there, and I talked to the people, like, it just hurts my heart. So we have a value issue as a community, as a society. And if we can shift those values, and you said what I was thinking in the first place, because I always imagine if I could just have some apartment buildings and make them available so that people have a place to be so that they can address the trauma, because being outside is traumatic. There's the weather, there's so many things that happen, there's the police and the parks department and all the other wild things that happen. And then also, and not have barriers to that, like you can just be there, right? Like it doesn't have to be about your dry or about, you know, whatever, but then have services available, because when people can stabilize, if there's a service they need, whether it's jobs or for healthcare or whatever, then they're in a better position to be able to access that and take advantage of it. And then I think related to that, I think it's not just an apartment building where, and I'm just speaking personally now, I think it's not just an apartment building where we say, okay, all folks who are intense, you can live here, but we all need to live together, right? And so, you know, mixed use or whatever, I guess is the term that they have for it, right? But like that, I think really helps us with our humanity struggle, where some people are not able to see the humanity in other people because they get otherized and demonized and so forth.